Hello and welcome to this really fun tutorial by Flomotion. Because today I'm going to show you how to create this really hip freeze time effect, as you may have seen on Instagram or TikTok. Hey, and I'm actually going to show you how you can create this a little more advanced example here. And why is this a little more advanced, you may ask now? Well, this is because I want to show you how you can freeze yourself and put yourself behind the freeze frame, as well as put yourself in front of the freeze, which also involves some clever thinking. But before we even start with that, let me tell you 3 things. First, as always, if you have any questions about this tutorial or any workflow I'm going to show you, or about anything else, just leave me a comment and I will answer all of them. And second, I have a special bonus for all of you who make it until the end of this video, because there I will show you how you can cut out yourself of any video in less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds? Okay, yeah, I'm really going to show you how you can cut yourself out in less than 5 seconds. And the third thing is already part of the tutorial, because I want to talk a bit about the shutter speed, or shutter angle, or exposure time of your camera. Because this is something that is very important for the freeze time effect, but many of you are not really aware of this. Because the shutter speed defines how sharp your image and therefore also your freeze frame will be. So the camera takes 25 pictures in 1 second, and that already gives us some limitations as well as many possibilities, because we can now not expose our image for a longer time span than 1/25th of a second, because after that we will already need to take the second picture in order to get 25 pictures done in 1 second. Just think of a thumb cinema, but you only have 2 or 3 pictures for a 10-second show. So the pictures may be great, but the movie will be rather disappointing. But back to the exposure time. Of course you can shoot faster than 1/25th of a second, with some cameras even up to 1/4000th of a second, or even 1/8000th. But what does that mean, and what does that do to the image? Here is an example of me jumping at 1/25th of a second, and you see it gets pretty blurry. And here I try to do the exact same jump, but with 1/4000th of a second. And you see that the image is super sharp, because that is how far I can move within that really short amount of time. So if you have a fast moving object and you want to see it sharp, simply shoot it very fast. And remember that I told you that not everybody is aware of all of that, even people who already created freeze time videos. So did you notice that most of those videos were shot outside in bright daylight? And as many of today's videographers are shooting in automatic mode, what happens is that the exposure time will get set super fast automatically, as so much light will come in those situations. So they have their shutter speed super fast without even knowing, and without even knowing that this will help them a lot in post-production. So speaking of post-production, let's import the footage that I shot by dragging it onto the new compositions icon, and let's have a look for the timing where we want to have our frozen frames. So maybe I just quickly play this back so you see what I have actually shot. So for those kinds of shots you really have to plan out what you want to achieve at the end, because it can sometimes be a bit tricky, or you can get confused on what you have to do first and so on. So in this case I somehow did it like you've seen it in the video. I kneel down, and this is where I'm later going to be frozen. Then I jump over myself, and at the end I do the push with my finger. And as a reference, you see I set a small marker over here on the floor to see where I need to knee down and to see where I need to jump. And let's actually have a look at the jump, because when I go through this frame by frame, you see that each of those frames is really perfectly frozen in time. And this is because I have actually shot this, believe it or not, with an exposure time of 1/4000th of a second, which will make it super easy to cut out those frames. Okay, so let's quickly rename this, call this the original, and I'm just clicking on the layer and hitting return to rename them, and I'm going to the point in time where I want to kneel down, and now I'm duplicating the layer by going to edit, duplicate, and now I'm going to trim the layer. So I'm just pushing it to my time indicator, and by holding down shift it will automatically snap. And let's call this layer sit, because I'm sitting. Now we go forward to the jump, and let's just look for a nice frame, and this one's pretty nice because I also have eye contact with the camera. So again, I'm going to duplicate that layer, trim it, and rename this to jump. So now back on those frames, I can now right click on the footage, go to time, and make this one a freeze frame. And in this way you get a keyframe which has this square shape, and it sits on the frame you want to freeze. And I'm doing the same for the jump. Go to the frame that I want to freeze, which is the first frame here, right click, time, freeze frame. And now I quickly bring down the transparency of both of the layers. So I just hit T for transparency, bring it to 50%, and let's quickly play this back to see what's happening right now. So I've frozen this, and now I'm jumping, and I have already frozen this. So we're already on a pretty good way here. So let's start with this time span where I'm sitting down and walking backwards. So this is super easy because the frozen frame simply needs to be on top. So I simply have to cut out that frame, and I will roto it out for now, and will also show you some tricks on how to roto out the hair. But as promised, at the end I'm going to show you how you can cut out yourself in really less than 5 seconds automatically. But now let's simply go to the pen tool, click on the pen tool, zoom in, then click on the layer you want to mask out and simply draw your mask. And when you hold down the mouse button while you draw it, you get those anchor points, and you can make round shapes. And for the hair, I'm simply doing a really rough mask without paying too much attention to all the detail, because I'm going to take a look at that later on. Now I've done it, I can solo it and of course bring them back to 100%. And now I see that I can tweak them a little bit more, and you can really take your time for that to get a really nice result. And at the end you can also hit F to get the mask feather options. By the way, you can also get them by twirl down the layer, then twirl down masks, and there you have all the options, and I'm just feathering those for like 2 pixels. And as a bonus, I'm also going to create a second mask for the shadow, because I think it looks quite nice if the shadow is also frozen. And also feather this a bit. And let's turn off the audio for the layers and quickly disable the last freeze frame so that we can only have a look on what we have so far. Pretty cool, huh? And now you directly also see the issue. Now I have to jump over myself, and this is why most of those freeze frame videos really only have that kind of an effect, where the frozen frame sits on top and not behind, because that is always a little bit tricky to do. But before we do that, let's quickly work on the hair a little bit, because remember, and you also see it here, I have all the detail and the freeze frame doesn't have all the detail. So let's simply duplicate the sit layer, and by the way, with this icon here you can make the mask shape visible and non-visible. Okay, so let's duplicate it by hitting edit, duplicate, bring it beneath the original layer and call this hair. And we can solo this. For the masks I could simply remove them, but maybe I'm going to use them later on, so let's just bring them to none. So they do nothing, and now I'm simply drawing another mask around the hair part, because you may have noticed that the sky is pretty blue, so maybe we could try to key out the sky with the keylight effect. So I'm just typing in keylight, bring it onto the hair, and for the screen color, taking the color picker and just click somewhere near my hair. And by hitting Alt+4 at the same time, you can see the alpha channel of the mask. So you see, you get a little bit more detail in the hair. But you could also do it with different ways. Maybe let's try to use a luma matte. In that way, we just key out parts that are brighter. And we can set the effect to not key out darker, which is the default, but key out brighter. And then just play with our threshold. And you see, some of the hair just comes back. And now we can simply play with the featherness. So now this is with and without the hair. And hey, while we're at it, I'm also going to show you a third method of how to do that. So we already have the key light, then we have the luma key, and now let's try it with an extract effect. And remember, at the end, I'm going to show you another method on doing that. So in the extract, you see that we have a lot of black values, and then we have some brighter values, and I believe that this is the blue in the sky. So let's just get rid of the blue values here. And now we can feather them. And this is with and without the hair. Perfect. And you can really play with this. So now I am jumping over myself, and now I need to land in front of myself. And this is super tricky because we need to roto ourselves on top of the layer. So, but again, let's at first create our jump freeze frame. And we do that as we have done it before, by quickly drawing a mask around it. And you could even try it with some of the methods that I just showed you for the hair, because I'm jumping against a completely blue sky. So if you want to have a quick solution, you could try to key it, or use a luma keyer, a color keyer, or simply try the extract effect. And there are many more ways to do it. For example, the Roto Brush, the new Roto Brush that is within After Effects 2021. And if you click over here, there's a really cool tutorial where I show you how to use that effect. And again, in the end, I'm going to show you how to do it in less than 5 seconds. And also we are going to use that Roto Brush in just a few seconds to roto myself out in front of me sitting. So in just a few seconds I will also explain to you how you could use that to simply roto out that one frame, but just for the sake of it, let's do this one manually. But honestly, as I'm rotoing myself out on top of all of this later on, I could probably get away with a pretty sloppy roto here. But we're not doing that. Okay, turn everything back on. This is what we have now. So, we need to bring ourselves in front of the jump. And we have to start with that when the freeze frame starts. So we take the original and split it. So we can do that by edit, split layer. And we bring the original 2 on top of everything. So let's also bring down the transparency to see what we have here. Here I obviously need to be in front of everything, and here I'm still covering me sitting until here. So let's again edit, split. Let's bring up the opacity again, and I can bring this beneath everything again. So now we need to actually roto out that part from here to here. And if we would do that by hand, that would just take ages. Remember how long it took me to cut out one image, and I already sped that one up a little bit. So therefore I'm going to show you a really cool tool called the Roto Brush, and you can find it over here, the Roto Brush. And when I click on this, nothing happens. And this is because the Roto Brush only works on the layer itself and not on the composition. So all you have to do is double click on the layer, and now we are within the layer. I can go to the first frame here. Let's zoom in a little bit. So this is the time span we want to work on. And how does it work? We have this green brush here, and if you hold down Control and drag left and right with your right mouse button, it gets bigger or smaller. And when we paint over the image, you can define an area that you want to roto out. So this already looks pretty nice. I can zoom in and paint over the parts that it did not take into consideration, and it will pretty fast update. Let's make this a bit smaller and also paint on my fingers here. And this is all real time. Remember how long it took me to create the mask before? And all I have to do now to get the second frame is to go forward one frame. And this is already the next frame. Now I'm just skipping through this, and every time it misses something, I'm simply painting this on again. And if it takes too much, you can hit down the Alt button, and now the brush gets red and you can subtract that. So a really easy way of working. So this is real time at the moment. Just zooming out a little bit to see it better. So once I've done that for the complete time span, and I have simply adjusted about 10 to 15 frames, and for the rest I stick with whatever After Effects has done for me, I now have to click on the freeze button, because now After Effects will bake everything that it has calculated into that effect. So now I hit the freeze button, and this will simply take some time to calculate. You see it's now freezing 91 frames, and those 91 frames of Roto have took me about 4, maybe 4.5 minutes. This is absolutely great. And let me tell you something, once this is done, all of this is within the Roto Brush effect, so we can still fine tweak it later on. Absolutely perfect. Hey, and if you see an error somewhere, you can simply hit the freeze button again, then it's unfrozen, and you can paint something to it again or remove something from it again. And as I told you before, I have more tutorials on that tool, because that's by far not all this can do. This tool doesn't only have the Roto Brush tool, but also the Refine Edge tool, which can take care of fine details like hair, fur, and all of that, and some semi-transparent parts. So this is super, super powerful. Okay, now let's simply click on the composition again, and we are back in the composition, and let's have a look at this. This is me rotoed out jumping, and as I told you, we have different options here like feathering, shift the edges. You could decontaminate the edge colors, which would make more sense if you wanted to place me in another background, but actually that bluish tone doesn't really matter because I'm putting myself on top of the blue sky anyways. So let's simply unsolo this, and of course we need to fill that gap in between where we don't have any background, and we can simply bring the original a bit further. So this is what we have now. And as I told you, you could now shift the edges maybe a little bit to get rid of some of the blue tones. You could also use motion blur to get a smoother result. Or again, as we have done before, you can simply use the keylight effect behind the Roto Brush to get rid of all the blue tones. Just make sure to go to the intermediate result. And you see this is with and without the keylight effect. And again, for the jump, I could duplicate that, bring it beneath the original jump, and again, call this one hair, solo it, hit M to get all the masks. Don't use that mask. Create a quick mask around the hair. And as this hair mask lies behind everything, because remember we have rotoed myself out on top, we can simply leave it as it is. And this is our result. And I'm only going to do one more thing here before we go into the 5-second tip. Because you see, at the end, when I'm coming closer the background gets out of focus. Because I shot this on autofocus. And the reason why this gets so blurry is because I was shooting with a pretty wide aperture. So I had the aperture set to 1.4 to get as much light in as possible. Because remember, I shot all of this with 1/4000th of a second. So I shot this super fast. So in order to still get enough light into the camera to get those nice pictures, I had to open up the aperture as much as possible. But that is pretty easy. Let's just have a look at the floor in about the same distance from the camera. So I can hit Ctrl R to get rulers and just drag them out here. And now I'm just looking at that distance on the floor. And over here, it is still sharp. So I'm dragging that marker and bring it up here. And then it gets out of focus until here. I would say this is the most amount. So I set another marker here. So now I can go to the first marker and search for the effect called camera lens blur and bring it onto the SID layer. By default, this already is set to a value of 5. So let's bring this to 0 and also set a keyframe for it. And at the end, we just need to eyeball this to be as much out of focus, maybe something like 6.9. Now we hit U to see the keyframes, select both of them with our mouse, hit copy, and now I'm going back to the first marker, click on the hair and paste it to the hair, and I do the same for the jump and the jump hair. Select both of them, hit Ctrl V or simply go to Edit, Paste. And now, when I'm coming closer to the camera, I'm also getting out of focus. And this could already be the end of this tutorial, but as promised, I'm going to show you how to cut yourself out in less than 5 seconds. And therefore, I'm quickly going to the jump, quickly set the mask to none, just to have a clean image, and quickly saving out that image. So I can go to Composition, Save Frame as File, and I'm simply saving this as a JPEG into my freeze folder and call it freeze frame 1. And now simply hit render. Now I have the image. Go into Photoshop and open that image. And now let's start with the challenge. Remove a person from any background in less than 5 seconds.
Go!
Here we go. Go to select, click on subject. Now go to the mask icon down here and click it.
Congratulations!
And we are done. Now you can simply save this one as a PNG file and you are good to go. But you could still refine this. Go to select and mask and go to the refine mode, and you want to be aware of the object. And now you could simply paint over the parts where you think you want to have more detail, like for example the hair. And you see that? And back in After Effects, you could now go into your composition and simply replace the frozen footage with your PNG files. So you could already start with that workflow. In that way, you will even render a bit faster because it doesn't have to process the frozen frame for the video all the time, but only an image that is already masked out. Hey, and now this is the end of this tutorial. So if you learned something today, or if you find a way to mask out yourself even faster, let me know in the comments down below. And if you liked what you've seen so far, then give me a thumbs up, give me a like, or hey, even subscribe to my channel, because in that way more people will see the video, and in that way I can do more of those video tutorials for you, and I really love doing those. But now I wish you a lot of fun being creative with freezing yourself in After Effects.